This entire message is not really about whether someone misses you, dreams about you, regrets losing you, or finally realizes your value after your silence changed the shape of their world. It is about something far deeper than romance. It is about awakening. It is about the moment a person finally stops abandoning themselves in order to keep love alive. That is the real transformation hidden beneath every word of this speech. The connection between you and this person was never meaningless. It was never imaginary. It was never all in your head. Something real existed between you, something powerful enough to leave fingerprints on both souls long after the distance began. You felt it because it was real. They feel it because it was real. And no amount of silence, pride, distraction, or separation has been able to fully erase it. But this speech also reveals a painful truth that many people spend years trying to avoid.
Sighs. Love alone is not always enough. Deep feelings do not automatically create emotional maturity. Missing someone does not mean a person suddenly knows how to protect the connection they once neglected. Regret is not the same thing as growth. Longing is not the same thing as readiness. And realizing your value after losing access to you does not undo the damage caused when you were standing there loving them openly. That is why your silence changed everything. Not because silence was manipulation, not because you wanted revenge, not because you wanted them to suffer. Your silence changed everything because for the first time you chose yourself. You stopped chasing clarity from someone committed to confusion. You stopped shrinking your needs to make another person comfortable. You stopped carrying the emotional weight of two people while pretending it did not hurt you. And the moment you pulled your energy back into yourself, the illusion collapsed. They could no longer lean on your endless patience while remaining emotionally unavailable themselves. They could no longer assume your love would wait forever regardless of how little they nurtured it, and that is what broke something open inside them. For the first time, they were forced to sit alone with the consequences of their choices, forced to feel the emptiness your absence created, forced to realize that your love was not ordinary. You were not easy to replace because what you offered was rare. Emotional safety, understanding, patience, honesty, depth, presence. You loved them in a way that touched parts of themselves they kept hidden from the rest of the world. But the deepest lesson of this speech is not about their awakening. It is about yours. You were never meant to lose yourself trying to convince someone to choose you. You were never meant to live in constant anxiety waiting for another person to become emotionally ready. You were never meant to confuse suffering with love or inconsistency with destiny. Real love does not require you to betray your own dignity in order to keep it alive. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, you learned that. You learned that boundaries are not cruelty. They are self-respect in action. You learn that stepping back from what hurts you is not weakness. It is wisdom. You learn that silence can sometimes communicate more truth than endless explanations ever could. You learn that love cannot thrive where reciprocity does not exist. Most importantly, you learn that your worth does not increase or decrease based on another person's ability to recognize it. That realization changes a person forever. The version of you that begged for reassurance, overexplained your feelings, waited endlessly, and carried hope long after exhaustion had set in. That version of you was not foolish. That version of you simply loved deeply. But now you are evolving into someone different, someone calmer, someone clearer, someone who no longer needs to chase love to prove they deserve it. And that is why the energy shifted, because your heart stopped asking, "Will they choose me?" and started asking, "Is this connection truly worthy of me?" That question changes everything. Maybe this person will return. Maybe they will finally face themselves honestly. Maybe they will become capable of offering the consistency, vulnerability, and emotional courage they once avoided. Or maybe they will not. Maybe their role in your life was never permanent. Maybe they entered your world only to awaken you. Maybe the purpose of the connection was not reunion, but transformation. And if that is true, it still mattered. It still carried meaning. It still changed you forever. Because some people are not sent into your life to stay exactly as they arrived. Some are sent to break old cycles, expose hidden wounds, awaken self-worth, and redirect your path towards something healthier and more aligned. Some connections exist to teach you that you can survive losing someone and still become stronger, softer, wiser, and more whole afterward. That is why this story is not tragic. Painful? Yes. Transformative? Absolutely. But not tragic. Because in the middle of all the confusion, distance, longing, silence, and heartbreak, you found something priceless: yourself. You rediscovered your center. You stopped measuring your value by how hard someone fought to keep you. You stopped treating love like a test you had to pass. You stopped begging for emotional presence from people unwilling to meet you there. And now you stand differently, not hardened, not bitter, not closed off, just awake. Awake enough to know that real love should feel safe, mutual, honest, and emotionally available. Awake enough to understand that you cannot heal another person by sacrificing yourself. Awake enough to recognize that the right connection will never require you to abandon your peace just to maintain it. And somewhere, whether they admit it or not, this person feels that change in you deeply. They feel your absence. They feel your silence. They feel the loss of the version of you that once waited endlessly for them. But now the decision no longer belongs only to them. The power shifted the moment you remembered who you were. So if there is one final truth at the center of this entire speech, it is this: what is truly meant for you will never require you to lose yourself in order to keep it. Real love will not ask you to shrink, chase, suffer endlessly, or survive on uncertainty. Real love meets you with clarity. It chooses you openly. It honors your presence while it still has access to it. And even when love becomes difficult, it will never demand that you betray your own soul just to remain connected. The connection changed them, but it transformed you. And that transformation is the real destiny this entire journey was trying to lead you toward all along. In the end, this entire message circles back to one painful and beautiful truth. They did not fully understand what you meant to them until your energy stopped reaching for them. That is the center of everything. Not the tests, not the silence, not the mixed signals, not the late-night thoughts, the deleted messages, the checking of profiles, the dreams, or the quiet panic that now follows them into every empty moment of the day. All of those are only symptoms of a deeper realization finally rising to the surface. They loved you. Not in the shallow way people casually use the word, not as comfort, convenience, validation, or temporary attention. They loved the way you made them feel understood without performance. They loved the way your presence softened parts of them they normally kept hidden. They loved the emotional safety they never fully admitted they depended on. They loved the way you stayed gentle in a world that taught people to protect themselves by becoming cold. And because they loved you, losing your emotional pursuit felt like losing gravity itself. For a long time, They believed your care would remain available no matter how inconsistent they became. They grew used to your warmth, used to your patience, used to your willingness to reach across silence and confusion, trying to preserve the connection. They mistook your loyalty for permanence. They thought they had more time. They thought your heart would continue making space for them indefinitely. But then something changed. You stopped chasing, not loudly, not dramatically, not out of revenge. You simply became tired of abandoning yourself in order to keep the bond alive. And that quiet shift echoed through them more powerfully than any argument ever could, because when someone has grown emotionally dependent on your availability, your absence becomes impossible to ignore. Suddenly, they notice every silence, every delayed reply, every missing warmth, every moment where your energy no longer rushes toward them the way it once did. They begin searching for signs that they still matter to you because the certainty they once leaned on has disappeared. That is why they test you, not always consciously, not always maliciously. Sometimes it is fear disguised as casual behavior, a story posted hoping you will react, a safe message sent without vulnerability attached, a small reach toward you that allows them to measure whether your heart is still open without risking full honesty themselves. Because underneath every test is the same terrified question, do I still have access to you? And the reason your calmness unsettles them now is because your energy no longer answers that question automatically. You are still kind, still present, still human, but you're no longer emotionally waiting in the same way, and they feel that deeply. What hurts them most is not simply the possibility of losing you. It is realizing they may have lost the version of you that loved without hesitation, the version that trusted openly, the version that made them feel emotionally safe, even while they remained emotionally guarded themselves. Now they are being forced to confront something they avoided for a very long time. Love requires courage, not hidden feelings, not silent longing, not indirect signs. Courage, the courage to speak honestly, the courage to show up consistently, the courage to stop hiding behind pride, confusion, timing, or fear, the courage to risk rejection in order to protect something meaningful. And they are beginning to understand that they delayed that courage for too long. That is why this speech feels so emotionally heavy, because it is not only describing love, it is describing regret. The kind of regret that appears when someone realizes they had something rare in their hands, but kept treating it like something that could wait. Now every memory carries weight for them. The small moments, the conversations, the warmth in your voice, the patience you offered, the way you understood them before they fully understood themselves. All of it feels louder now because your energy no longer belongs entirely to them. But while this speech spends so much time describing their internal world, the deeper purpose is actually about you. It is about your awakening. Because somewhere during all this pain, something inside you matured. You stopped measuring your value through another person's emotional availability. You stopped chasing reassurance from someone unwilling to meet you fully. You stopped trying to earn clarity from confusion. You chose peace over emotional survival, and that choice transformed you. Now your silence is not emptiness. It is self-respect. Your calmness is not indifference. It is emotional clarity. Your distance is not punishment. It is the natural result of finally understanding that love should not require you to lose yourself. That is why the power shifted. Not because you became cold, but because you became grounded. And grounded people no longer panic when someone pulls away. They no longer beg for consistency. They no longer exhaust themselves trying to convince another person to recognize their worth. They simply observe, feel, learn, and choose accordingly. That energy changes everything. Now, This person feels what it is like to stand outside the emotional safety they once took for granted. They are experiencing the consequences of delayed honesty. They are realizing that feelings hidden too long eventually become grief. And maybe they will grow from this. Maybe they will finally step forward honestly. Maybe they will become capable of loving with openness instead of fear. Or maybe they will continue hesitating until the opportunity fully passes. That part is no longer yours to control. Because the final lesson of this entire message is not about whether they come back. It is about whether you continue abandoning yourself while waiting for them to decide. And you are no longer that person. You now understand something that changes relationships forever. Real love does not need endless chasing to survive. Real love does not thrive on confusion. Real love does not repeatedly ask one person to carry the emotional weight for two. Love that is truly healthy arrives with honesty, consistency, emotional presence, and mutual effort. It does not hide behind tests and silence forever. It does not depend on your pain to recognize your value. So if there is one final truth hidden beneath every line of this speech, it is this: the moment you stop chasing them, you finally return to yourself. And whether they rise to meet you or not, that return to yourself is the real transformation the universe was trying to create all along. What this entire message is ultimately pointing toward is not the other person, not their thoughts, not their silence, and not even their return. It is pointing toward you and the irreversible shift that has already taken place inside you. The real story was never about chasing or being chased. It was about the moment you stopped abandoning yourself in order to keep someone else close. That moment, whether it came suddenly or gradually, changed the entire structure of your emotional world. When you stopped reaching, something deeper than silence happened. You stepped out of the cycle where your worth depended on someone else's response. You stopped interpreting confusion as connection. You stopped treating uncertainty as love. And in doing so, you created space where clarity could finally exist. That clarity is what feels like distance to the other person, but what it actually is alignment returning to you. The speech frames their reaction as emotional intensity, regret, obsession, or awakening. But beneath all of that interpretation is a simpler truth. When someone no longer has automatic access to your attention, they are forced to experience the consequences of how they treated it. That realization can trigger reflection, longing, fear, or even regret, but none of those emotions automatically equal growth, readiness, or change. Feelings are not transformation. Awareness is not repair. What matters more than anything described in their inner world is what is happening in yours. You are no longer orbiting their inconsistency. You are no longer reorganizing your emotional state around their availability. You are no longer shrinking yourself to maintain connection. Instead, you are learning a more grounded form of love, one that does not require anxiety, guessing, or self-erasure to survive. That is why the speech repeatedly returns to the idea of stillness. Not as mysticism, but as psychological separation. Stillness is what remains when you stop over-investing in outcomes you cannot control. It is the point where your nervous system is no longer tied to every signal from another person. And from that space, you see more clearly what was real, what was imagined, what was reciprocal, and what was one-sided effort sustained by hope. The emotional pull they are described as experiencing, missing you, thinking about you, comparing others to you, is not proof of readiness or destiny. It is proof of attachment memory being activated by absence. Human beings often only fully register value when access is interrupted. But recognition after loss is not the same thing as the ability to show up differently. So the conclusion is not, "they will return," or "they are meant for you." That framing is secondary. The real conclusion is this: you are no longer the person who waits in uncertainty to be chosen, explained to, or emotionally validated by someone inconsistent. Whether they come back or not, the version of you that needed that dynamic has already begun to dissolve. What replaces it is something quieter and more stable. You no longer confuse emotional intensity with emotional safety. You no longer interpret inconsistency as depth. You no longer measure love by how strongly it affects your nervous system. Instead, you begin to recognize love by how peacefully you can exist inside it. And that is the real ending of this entire speech. Not reunion, not regret, not destiny, but return. Not their return to you, but your return to yourself. From that place, nothing is being chased anymore. Nothing is being proven. Nothing is being earned through depletion. What remains is choice, clarity, and self-respect that no longer negotiates its own value. That is the final message underneath all the language of universe, signs, and tests. You are no longer inside something that costs you yourself to remain in it. And once that becomes real, everything else becomes optional. The deepest conclusion of this entire speech is not about a mysterious pull between two people, nor about fate, obsession, or signs from the universe. All of that language is built around something much simpler and more grounded, a shift in attachment, attention, and self-worth. At its core, the speech describes a familiar emotional pattern. One person withdraws or becomes inconsistent, the other person stops chasing, and that change in pursuit creates emotional discomfort, reflection, and longing. The narrative then interprets that discomfort as something cosmic or extraordinary. But underneath the dramatic framing, what is actually happening is psychological rather than mystical. When access to someone's attention is no longer guaranteed, the mind reacts strongly, reevaluates memories, and often exaggerates the importance of what feels uncertain or lost. The speech places great emphasis on the idea that they are realizing your value or feeling your absence deeply. While people can certainly miss someone and reflect on what they had, the key truth is that missing someone does not automatically translate into change, maturity, or readiness. Emotion is not the same thing as transformation. Memory is not the same thing as commitment. And intensity of feeling is not proof of long-term compatibility or growth. What actually matters in this entire dynamic is the internal shift happening on your side. The most important development described in the speech is not their reaction, but your withdrawal from self-abandonment. You stopped over-investing in uncertainty. You stopped interpreting inconsistency as meaning. You stopped trying to earn clarity from someone who could not consistently offer it. That is the real turning point. This is where the idea of stillness becomes important in a grounded sense. Not as spiritual power or cosmic law, but as emotional regulation and self-restraint. Stillness is what happens when you stop feeding anxiety-driven attachment loops. It is the moment where you are no longer constantly scanning for signs, decoding silence, or adjusting your behavior to maintain fragile connection. In that space, your mind becomes clearer and your emotional dependence weakens. From that clarity, something important becomes obvious. You are not in control of their consistency, but you always had control over your participation. And once you reduce your participation in something that is unstable, the dynamic naturally changes. not because you activated something in them, but because you removed your own energy from an imbalanced system. The speech frames this as they are testing you, they are obsessed, or the universe is sending signals. But a more realistic interpretation is simpler. Uncertainty creates internal conflict in people, and people often respond to that conflict with hesitation, avoidance, or indirect behavior. Sometimes they reach out, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they reflect, sometimes they move on. There is no guaranteed narrative underneath it. So the real conclusion is not that this connection is destined, special, or controlled by unseen forces. The real conclusion is that you have reached a point of emotional clarity where your attention is no longer automatically available to confusion. You are no longer in the phase of over-explaining your value or waiting for inconsistent behavior to turn into certainty. You are beginning to evaluate relationships by stability, reciprocity, and emotional safety rather than intensity, ambiguity, or emotional highs and lows. Whether the other person returns, reflects, or remains the same is no longer the center of the story. The center has shifted to your ability to remain whole without needing validation from someone who is uncertain. And that is the true ending of the speech. Not obsession, not fate, not hidden messages, but the quiet realization that your peace is no longer negotiable, and your life no longer revolves around being chosen by someone who cannot choose consistently.